Thanks for being here early. And we're going to get one more minute. And then I'm going to launch into a hilarious, hopefully, story from most of our lives about how it feels to be in a breach. And I have to narrate it because it's usually audio-based, but there's no audio output. So we're going to do our best. So if you don't know me, my name is Jason Haddix. I am probably mostly career offensive security guy. So pen testing, red teaming, web application assessment, mobile assessment, I've kind of been everything in the offensive arena. And in my career, somehow, I transitioned from being an offensive guy into being a security leader. So I went from being team lead to then director to then VP, then eventually to being a CISO at a very large organization. So I've sat in the CISO seat and I've felt the breach not only from being the red teamer who uses the hacker techniques to do the breach, but also from the seat of the leader who has to experience the breach. And so this talk is a little bit of a mixture of both and kind of some mental models I built around breaches and adversaries and how they work these days. And hopefully it'll be useful to you guys. Okay, so we're gonna get started. So this is the story of a breach. Okay, so here we are with threat actor. Threat actor has landed on a network with some creds that he got who knows where. And we have our SOC analysts, and they see some alerts, and there's something fishy going on. He's dropped some creds, and we have an alert here in the SOC for impossible travel, saying this user did some stuff. Now, the attacker is on the network and has dropped hashes, and the SOC has noticed that something's fishy going on here. This user shouldn't be logging in from Russia, so let's look into this session. And so the attacker's like, I better not do anything stupid. Hopefully they have EDR. They have EDR, but the attacker has bypassed the EDR controls. Now, the SOC has seen that some fishy stuff is going on through Microsoft Alerts, and it's time for the attacker to move. So they're on the run, and now incident response has been initiated. Everybody's investigating what's going on. They're trying to disable the compromised accounts, but they don't know if they have all of them. Threat intel is trying to figure out what's going on, which is a hard task, and everybody's closing in on the attacker. The attacker's on the move, and the detection engineering builds some rules to discover the attacker's TTPs and strangles them out of the network, and that's the end of our breach. But wait, there's more. The attacker has another account, so they're off to the races. And you know what they do is hackers, they really like to get into your AD or your AAD. And so now the attacker's scaling the different places that they can, pivoting. You know, maybe XDR will stop this attacker. Maybe not, we'll see. No, they unhooked the EDR and the XDR. So now they're scaling to the domain controller, which is the ultimate kind of thing. They're there, that's their goal. And there's another person up there. Hello, comrade. And now the SOC has to go into incident response mode, investigation mode, breach notification mode, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the story of your average breach these days. Now, I put this video up front not only because it's hilarious, but it's actually very, very accurate to how stuff happens when you're inside of a modern cybersecurity breach. Everybody gets mobilized, and I know this from having experienced this pain as both a practitioner, a leader sitting in the seat when this is happening, and having been the person who's executed these type of attacks. So let's talk about my experience. This is my learned experience, right? And so some of it might not match your learned experience, having worked in IT or security in different ways, but I'm hoping my experiences will help. This talk is a little bit of a mishmash between red and blue. So you're in a track that is called like the red team track and like the attacker track. But really it's kind of half offense, half defense, half prescription. And hopefully it'll be useful to everybody, honestly. This is a harken back to if any of you are like real nerds like me, like they used to have this show called Red versus Blue. It was like a Halo themed show. It was awesome, I love this thing. They basically did a whole animation around two teams of Halo PvPers playing against each other, which was fantastic. Okay, so let's rewind to what I think is a little bit of an advent in security and adversaries. Let's rewind to 2021 and 2022, when I was sitting in a leadership position at a company that got breached by Lapsus. Now this is a sensitive one for some people in here because you work for these companies and your logo is on here. Lapsus was a group of young hackers who basically had a whole bunch of really interesting tricks, knew Microsoft infrastructure very, very well, and compromised a whole bunch of really, really big companies. And they flaunted it in a Telegram channel, and basically just kind of, they were not really out for ransom in most of the cases. Really, they were out just to shame these companies. And I worked at one of the companies on this list. Now, when this happened to us, at my company, we had a really great security team. I had built a great team with great individuals who were highly skilled in their domains. I would say that I covered the checklist of what you should have as table stakes for a security program. I myself am a red teamer and paid very special attention to what adversaries were doing. But this group came out of nowhere with kind of the stuff they did. So the first part of this talk is breaking down tactics and techniques from adversaries like Lapsus and the ones that follow them. And then, again, what I saw in the change of adversaries in 2023 and 2024. So, when I was part of this breach, what happened was I got really mad, right? Because like I said, I had all of the security products, I had a healthy budget, I had people I trusted on my team. It was amazing. I love that team. And I got breached, and all those other companies got breached, and I'm in a couple of CISO slacks. They're the kind of slacks that you sit in with other security leaders who kind of pretend they know what they're talking about, but really we're just like ducks on the lake with their feet paddling as fast as we can. Like being a CISO is a crazy job. It's so stressful. And so I went into the Slack and I was like, hey, we all got popped by these kids. How did this happen? Like, give me all of your threat intel. Give me all of your data. How did it happen to you guys? I'll tell you how it happened to me, at our organization. And so here's the quick list. And here I am Tony Stark, by the way. And my buddies are the Iron Legion coming to save me. So we put together a whole bunch of threat intel, a big package, and we distributed it between ourselves. But let's talk about how these kids and copycats of these kids worked in the last 2 years. So initial access is what we call kind of the red teaming world. It's like the first way to get into an organization, right? And so initial access is really important. A lot of people focus on initial access. Like, how did these people get in? Well, what happened to me and all of my CISO friends in big organizations is that COVID caused a mass work from home event, right? So we had people in offices who worked mostly in office, never worked from home. And then COVID hit and we had to send everybody home, right? It's the responsible thing to do. But we didn't have enough laptops that were corporately managed with antivirus on them or EDR on them to give all those employees. It was impossible for a big organization. Not only could we not do it, even if we had the budget to do it, the vendors themselves at the start of COVID, like Dell and HP and stuff like people make laptops, they couldn't give them to us fast enough for that amount of time. And so what happened is we had to pivot very quickly to work from home technology. SaaS services, like the Microsoft Cloud apps, to facilitate productivity work. Now what happened is when we told employees to go home and use their computers because we didn't have one to give to them, they were using their personal computers, which meant that these are the same computers that their kids go on and play Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite on, right? And these are the same boxes that sometimes they had torrented movies on or downloaded PDFs or had been phished by a mass phishing campaign or something like that. And so a lot of times, these boxes were already pre-owned by attackers who were selling access to the boxes. And so then they start logging into these boxes and saying, oh, they're now corporately connected. And so what they do is the attackers, they sell all of these credentials online, but then groups like Lapsus and others end up going on the different darknet markets to buy the credentials. And all they do is just search for your company's domain. So let's take one of the companies that was in the list was Uber, right? Uber was hit by Lapsus. So in order to get a credential to log into Uber's SSL VPN or some SaaS service of theirs, something like that, they would just go to a site. Back then it was Genesis Market. Now it's there's Russian Market, which is the predominant darknet forum for buying credentials. But they would go to Genesis Market and they would just put @uber.com. And then anybody who had already been pre-compromised, whose credentials were leaked, or whose cookies were already subject, would be in the search, and then they would just buy them for like $5 or something like that. It's ridiculous how cheap credentials are. So this was an issue, and it wasn't just Microsoft services that people were targeting. It was GitHub account credentials, Slack credentials, so they could get into Slack, things like that. And so really what happened was attackers started getting credentials, which was sad. Okay, so a lot of you are thinking, well, maybe a leaked username and password is not that bad, right? When an attacker gets a hold of that, because a modern organization should have two-factor authentication, right? Now, first of all, you'd be surprised about how many modern organizations haven't fully deployed 2FA across everything, right? It's hard. It's a hard deal, especially when you're a giant company. But in this case, because a lot of these machines were pre-owned, not only did the attackers have the credentials, the username and password, but they had the cookies. And so if you know about web technology, a cookie basically is a token that you get in your browser, stored in your browser, and it says that you've pretty much already authenticated every time you visit a website. And so for some of these services, they could just grab a cookie and log straight into the portal. And this is what happened to a lot of companies who were subject to this. Now, in other times they couldn't get access to, what they were after in the end was access to the SSL VPNs usually of the companies. But in other cases, they would infiltrate Slack. They would grab the Slack cookies or credentials and log into the company's Slack, which is a SaaS service. And then they would root around in there for more credentials, because none of us have ever shared a password via Slack, right? Right. Okay, cool. So they would look for more credentials in Slack. And then if they couldn't get credentials that didn't require 2FA for some reason, they couldn't find an in, what they would move on to is 2FA bombing. And so this was very publicly documented in Uber's run-in with a threat actor. And so what they would do is they have creds that were valid, but the company would have 2FA enabled with this push notification style MFA enabled. And so when you attempt to log in, you get a push notification on your phone that says, did you log in, do you trust this login, et cetera, or approve the login. And so what they do is just wait until a prime time of when they knew the employee, like wherever they lived or whatever. They would wait for a prime time where that person was like out on Friday night or something like that. And they would just send 1 million logins to this user. So their phone just blew up with like, hey, log in, log in, log in. This actually happened to, I think, 3 people in this scenario. And so sometimes the user would just be like, get this out of my face, and click approve, right, and let the attacker in. Other people would ignore it, and that's good. And then they went on to like plan C or D in their thing, and they would just be like, okay, I'm going to call this person. So in the case of Uber, they pretended to be actually the security group. And they pretended to be the security group. They called up the user and they said, hey, we're doing some integration security testing. You should be seeing a whole bunch of pop-ups on your phone. Can you click approve, please? The person was out, I think, with their family at dinner, as the story goes. And then they were like, yeah, sure, I got a call, whatever. And they clicked OK. So, again, there are other ways, but mainly they were trying to do this to get access to a VPN for an organization. Okay, so that's initial access. So what did they do once they were in, right? Well, this is actually one of my favorite parts, and influenced my red team testing for the next 2 years, is following what these real adversaries did. They didn't do anything that would alert the SOC, usually, right? So all they did was get initial access and sit on the network. They have access to the network now. And they would look at places that house documentation or source code or DevSecOps pipeline tools, and they would gather more and more creds, because invariably in these places, we have hard-coded creds. You would not believe how bad we are at secrets management. like as an industry. Like we send passwords to our friends, we store certificates in log data, we hard code API keys and documentation. There's passwords and documentation everywhere. It is really, really bad. And so what they did is they just used web requests, right? Like none of this really looked fishy to the SOC. They were already on the network, authenticated, and they were just going to websites like Jira, Confluence, CMDB, network log shares to look at network logs, GitLab, Artifactory, things like this. I have a checklist for you that I built with some other red teamer friends later on the slides. So if you want to look at these types of things and know where to look, either as a red teamer or as not a red teamer, as a defender, you can make sure that you're checking off kind of the hit list. Okay, so that was the previous version of that talk in a nutshell. Now, I want to talk about my experience from 2023 to 2024. So I left the CISO seat. I wasn't waking up happy. I was stressed out. I wanted to get back to more technical research. I really loved red teaming a lot. And so I was like, I'm going to go back to red teaming. But I don't want to do the type of red teaming that everyone else does. I really want to emulate like the real bad guys, right? Because like a lot of red teams are kind of pen test teams, but just like with the red team name. But they don't act like real bad guys. And so what I had to do is really immerse myself in kind of the dark web and threat intelligence and figure out what adversaries were actually doing, which meant me creating a whole bunch of sock puppet accounts on these underground forums, infiltrating Telegram channels, talking to friends who worked in cyber threat intelligence and stuff like that. So during this time in 2023 and 2024, like I said, I moved into red teaming and dark web research in order to make a better red team methodology. Oh, there we go. So this is 2023 to 2024. Have you guys seen this song before? The like, get the fuck out of that bitch, let's go. That one? Have you guys seen that? Yeah. So this is incident response in 2023 and 2024, mostly because of this. So attackers shifted, but not shifted. They augmented their kind of modus operandi with using credentials and attacking publicly facing web apps for infrastructure. So things like SSL VPN logins, firewalls, DevSecOps, web apps that you control from the internet. And so they shifted, and in 2023 and 2024, saw a massive number of CVEs against these web portals. And so that was kind of their secondary if they couldn't get into their credentials. So I started to build a mental model of what real adversaries do, how they act, and it really pissed off my red teamer friends, like a lot. Because it wasn't how they had built their methodologies at their very fancy consultancies. But I found it to work. So I'm going to tell you about how I built my mental model. So most some of you who are from Microsoft here or other companies, you face nation-state adversaries. This talk is not about them. You are the 5%. The rest of us are like the 95%. And so I'm going to talk about how probably the 95% are targeting an organization. Now, independently, while I was doing this in 2022, CISA came out with their initial access graph of techniques that adversaries used in breaches that they had studied, which mapped very closely to my individual research. So valid accounts being used, being 54% of how attackers got initial access, and that's just buying it off of the dark web. Spear phishing being a large amount, which is also in a red team methodology. And then like some small percentage is actually web hacking, or sometimes cloud misconfiguration bugs as initial access. Kaspersky, or I think it's Sophos, I can't remember who this came from, but one of the antivirus companies actually did another simultaneous study, like pretty much came out at the same time as the CISA study and confirmed kind of these same things. So let me break it down for you.
There is an order of operations that adversaries will use when targeting your organization. And I broke it down into levels in a mind map because that's just kind of how I work. So, level 1, if an adversary wants to attack your organization, they will go to the easiest places, which is they will go to the public websites, and they will go to sites like Pastebin, or places where breach dumps get posted, which is services like Dehashed, or many of the sources that you can see in breach dump aggregator tools like HateMail. And so these things are on the public web, right? You can find torrents of these dumps. Sometimes these are websites that get owned that your employees log into, and then their credentials end up in these dumps, and they use the same credential for your corporate internet. So the attacker wants to, or your corporate VPN. So your attacker wants to check this first. This is easy. This is out there. Any of you can find this by Googling. You're going to find torrents of people who have been breached or breached data. Now, level 2 is getting involved in the dark web ecosystem, which used to be Genesis market when I started this. Now it is primarily Russian market and the Telegram scene. So level 2, they will go to Russian market and do exactly what I said. They'll log into Russian market, which is a dark web site, and they'll put in @ your email domain, and they'll see if there's any mass phishers or mass malware authors who have done campaigns with drive-by malware or cred stealer malware, and they'll try to find you in the packs that they're selling on Russian market, which are relatively cheap, actually. Then, in level 3, they'll go to the ransomware as a service market, and they will attempt to, before, Lockbit has been supposedly shut down, but before companies like Lockbit, they release ransomware data, there is a private sale that they attempt to do of the data, right? They're not idiots, right? They ransomware a company, and then they try to extort them into paying the ransom. And then if they don't pay the ransom, they go out to a private forum where they try to sell the data to other hackers. And then if all else fails, then they'll just publish it online to shame the company. Now, if you are in these forums, you can purchase big packs of ransomware data against companies that you may want to infiltrate. This is more expensive. These packs cost anywhere between $10,000 and $100,000 to access the full data of a ransomware incident. Now, level 4 is the Telegram, WhatsApp, and Discord market, which is a burgeoning market for people selling initial access and just creds in general. Now, the reason that I think the biggest one in here, Telegram, is so popular right now is because Telegram's a chat bot. Most of you know it as a chat bot, but it's held in kind of like a soft non-extradition country, and they don't care what goes on Telegram. And so what the authors of, or these campaign runners of phishing campaigns and drive-by malware and stuff like that, what they started doing is building Telegram bots that would offer their stuff for sale. And so this is also the way that drug markets are working right now. Counterfeit markets are working right now. So you want to buy a fake Gucci purse, there's Telegrams out there right now that will sell you a fake Gucci purse or a fake Rolex or drugs or credentials. And so there are 2 sections of the WhatsApp, Telegram, and Discord sale ecosystems. There's the public ones where you can go in them and see what's up for sale and see samples of the data from the breaches and what people are selling. And then there's private channels. So the public ones we're able to look at. This is what I would consider like the freshest data. And so adversaries will go to these, they have access to them, and they will go to them and try to find credentials for your organization. And then there's private ones, which are much harder to infiltrate. The private ones are like invite-only clubs of hackers. And so in order to get into them, you have to prove that you are somehow complicit in crime. And so in order for threat intel researchers, like if you have any friends who are hardcore threat intel people and they're like in these things, a lot of times they have to like do some like illicit stuff to get in there, like trade credentials. Now, if you're a CTI person, a lot of times what you'll try to do is trade stuff that's already been published, like creds that are already been published, and trade them for access to the forum. Sometimes you'll buy something illicit off one of the markets and build up some rep, like buying things, like I said, like Gucci purses. Like on the scale of stuff you can buy that's illegal, that's pretty low, right? And hopefully you can get invites into these private forums that do other illicit things, like get stealer logs. So I have Stealer logs mentioned there on the public and private thing, is because basically what happens is the drive-by malware and the malware authors who do giant campaigns against the swath of big people, internet, like a big internet targets, they sell in the Telegram channels, they sell what's called Stealer logs. And so Stealer logs is basically the output of the malware when it hits your disk. It steals your browser cookie store, steals all stored passwords from your Chrome or Edge password store. It will grab certain files off of your hard drive depending on which malware it is. This is things like Redline. Redline's one of the biggest one right now. So adversaries will go here. Now we're 4 levels deep. They haven't even tried to hack you yet. Basically, they're just trying to find credentials for the easy way in. Okay, level 5. Adversaries will now begin to try to hack you, and they will begin to look at known exploits, known CVEs against your web infrastructure. This is when they actually have to do some work. Level 5 and level 6 are interchangeable. At this point, they will move on to a custom phishing campaign to get access if they think that will be fruitful for them. When doing a custom phishing campaign, you have 2 options when you phish people. Either you can phish them with a man-in-the-middle pop-up, so you phish somebody and you pretend to be Microsoft or Okta or something like that, and you say, put in your Microsoft credentials. And you can grab their creds that way and their cookie that way if you can do a successful phish. Or you can attempt to get them to open a backdoored file of some sort, which is really less likely today. A lot of the EDR, a lot of the email protection services are really good these days, so most of the phishing happens with the web pop-up stealing cookies type way. Now, if a phishing or known CVE fails, a phishing campaign or a known CVE fails, then they will move on to what we call end day, which is basically they will look at CVEs in the market that have been published, but never exploit code has been posted to GitHub or anything like that. So like a lot of times as a bug bounty hunter or just like a security researcher, I will go out and I will do some research and I will find a bug in something, Dell. And I'll find a bug in Dell and I'll report it to them and they'll be like, yeah, we're never gonna release the exploit code, thank you, we pay you a bug bounty, don't ever talk about it again, right? That's kind of the market. And so what Dell will do is they'll put out an advisory and they'll be like, hey, we had a really bad bug, it was in this product, you can patch your product now and fix it, but never will have anybody ever seen the exploit that I made, which is a shame sometimes. What they'll do is they'll look at those advisories and then they'll just do some patch dipping. This is the easiest way to do exploitation to get really good bugs. So they'll look at the version that was exploitable that I found, that I was looking at, and then they'll look at the version that is patched. And if the project is open source or they can do a binary diff of the product somehow or some reverse engineering, they'll figure out what I found pretty easily because there's a difference in the code. First of all, where did the code change? Okay, well it changed here. Even if I can't understand what changed, I know now something did change right there. So they'll find my exploit. And now I don't just have the exploit, Dell doesn't just have the exploit, they have the exploit. And they'll use that. The next level is actual 0 day. So this is where they'll target some kind of software that you have, and this requires either hardcore funding or hardcore skill. And so they try not to get to this level, but this is where they'll find a product that you're using or have widely deployed, and they'll attempt to do 0 day research, reverse engineering on that product, break into it. No one's ever found this bug before, and they will attempt to use that as initial access. And the last way is actually insider threat or corporate espionage. The reason we put at the last or the bottom level of kind of what they're willing to do is because there's a lot of opportunity to actually get attributed in level 9. Like if you do corporate espionage or insider threat type of stuff, like try to bribe an employee to give you access, it's easier to be attributed by security people. So it's way at the bottom. So this is how I believe modern adversaries work. And you can see that half of the ladder, half of the levels, they don't even really try to hack you. They just try to buy their way in, which is really interesting to me. So I designed a red team methodology that stuff. Okay, so that's the red team part. Now I'm going to talk about like, well, what do you do if you're trying to defend an organization that's going up against kind of a modern adversary like this? So the first thing that a lot of the companies, when they face Lapsus, or a lot of the companies that face some of these threat actors, these more modern threat actors, had to do was pivot harder to physical machines, right? Eventually we had to catch up in giving our employees who were going to work at home physical machines, which were managed with EDR, right? Antivirus software, fancy antivirus software, does more than that, but still. Or pivot to virtual desktops to ensure that the virtual desktop had EDR coverage. There was a lot more focus on privileged access management for different types of apps and IAM as well, that organizations had to actually pay more attention to. And then the caveat here was that like there's some local laws for international companies that prevent EDR on personal machines, but some companies tried to give their employees access to personal antivirus for their personal machines. So they would give them a stipend, basically saying, here's $80. You please go out and buy, some commercial or some like user-based antivirus for your machine. But not all of them could do that based on international laws. So in the authentication realm, a lot of people had to make sure that 2FA was deployed everywhere, right? And they're like, different forms of 2FA, but one is kind of like 2FA 2.5, which is the code matching and map that Azure will give you. So a lot of companies use Microsoft, right? And so you can add this level of two-factor authentication, which not only prompts the user when they log in for a number on their phone from their authenticator app, but also shows a map of where the login is coming from. And this will save you. Every once in a while, people will be like, hey, why am I getting a pop-up on my phone that says I'm trying to log in from Stockholm when I'm in, Texas or Seattle or something like that. So another thing that people did was upped and started paying attention to impossible travel alerts. A lot of people stuck impossible travel alerts in whatever product or whatever defensive product you use. They tried to, eventually they got too noisy, so they started to deprioritize these alerts. Well, after some of these breaches, they started to turn those alerts up and actually started paying attention to them. Managed Defender for Identity. People started turning that on real quick and subscribing to E5 for Microsoft, because like 80% of the world runs on Microsoft services. And then for MFA registration, which was one of the things that happened in kind of this chain of hilarious events of the Lapsus people, and some other threat actors too following, they added registration to add a new MFA device to your account. So let's say that you lose your phone or you need to add a new MFA device to your account. In a couple instances, the Lapsus kids figured out that there was no security controls on like where or when you could do that. Just like if they got access to your Microsoft account, they could log into the preliminary web portal and change the two-factor authentication device and then go to the VPN, try to log into the VPN, and they had their own registered two-factor authentication device that was just a burner phone of theirs. So there are some interesting ways to do this. So you can basically set up a group that allows MFA registration from anywhere, but it's only for 30 days for a certain while. So your MFA can only be registered for a certain set of time and based on a trusted network. So your home network is known by Microsoft, based on your usage. And so you could basically say only let them register a 2FA device from that. Otherwise, they have to call help desk and verify, some other way. Another way is basically do trusted location and conditional access on top of MFA registration, which is similar but different. So the other way is just to use FIDO, right? So like a YubiKey or a hardware token. This is easier said than done though, I think. So a lot of organizations fall into this trap. It's like, yeah, we'll just switch to FIDO. And then you realize, oh my God, first of all, like YubiKey doesn't, a YubiKey isn't compatible with every piece of software, right? It's only compatible with 80% of your applications in order to implement it. And then also to roll that out all at once is a giant pain in the ass. So a really good friend of mine, Clint Gibler, did an amazing thread where he solicited, I think, 10 stories from CISOs and kind of blue teamers who had to implement FIDO in the real world in big organizations and kind of their gotchas. And so he did a Twitter thread about it, which is linked there if you decide to go that way. The next kind of thing in the prevention, defense kind of world is secrets management. So like I talked about, we're really bad at secrets in the enterprise. And so not a lot of people actually have a dedicated secrets management program here. How many of your organizations have something where basically a whole team's job is to find secrets in the internal network and root them out from code, documentation? Yes, I know you, JR, because I worked with you. But yeah, I mean, so like anyone? Anybody have a team that does that? Kind of? 1, 2, 3? Yeah. Okay, so only, maybe the top 1% of organizations have a team that's supposed to do this. We're really bad at it. And so at the place that JR and I used to work, we built a program that did secrets management, and we broke it down into roughly 4 categories: detect, prevent, respond, and educate. So in the detect portion, you have to stop the bleeding. You have to find everywhere in your organization where credentials, API keys, certificates are being leaked. In the prevent part, you have to make sure your developers no longer commit those things after you've stopped the bleeding. In the respond part, you have to give them an option of what to do with those secrets, like vault. And then you also have to make sure that those secrets are being rotated via cred rotation policy. And then you have to educate the entire organization about why you're doing this, because otherwise they just hate you, right? Developers hate you. They're like, why are you messing with our authentication methods, the code that we have, the creds that we're using?
Red team uses them in their dictionary files now.
Yeah. So a lot of this defense stuff can actually be turned into offensive techniques. So like JR and I work together, and I'm sure the program has matured since I've been there. I've been out 2 years, right? But what he's saying is they took the stuff that they found and actually took those creds that they found via the stop the bleeding part and started putting them into their dictionary files. So when they were doing pen testing, they would see if anyone had reused those credentials somewhere, or there was a regression of that type of vulnerability. So here's the type of things in secrets management that most of the time you want to look out for. So it's traditional Windows creds of people sharing API keys, SaaS usernames and passwords, and certificates when you're building a secrets management program. Now, some of the post-initial access stuff. I ran into a team at Hack SpaceCon or Hack RedCon, one of the cons I spoke at, and they happened to have this workshop, and it was called Attacking DevSecOps Pipelines. And I didn't know these guys, and so I walked into their class, and gosh darn, was it one of the most amazing classes I had taken in the last, 2 years. And so these guys, I became fast friends with them because their whole class was about, after you get initial access, what do you do as a red teamer, and how is it different from what you've been taught to do as a red teamer? So Tom and Colbert from Accenture, formerly Fusion X, we spent days talking about this. I took their workshop, combined it with a whole bunch of stuff that I had learned in my career as a red teamer and as a CISO where adversaries had actually hit me. If you want to take a screenshot of this slide or a picture, this is the one I would suggest taking a picture of, because I don't know if I'm going to release this. This is part of my red team methodology. So what do you attack when you're a red teamer? Well, you attack knowledge bases: SharePoint, Confluence, MediaWiki, DocuWiki, Notion, TikiWiki, Wiki.js. You look at dev and project management software: Jira, Trello, Redmine. You look at source code management. You look at Git, GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Subversion, CVS, etc. You look at repo management, so Artifactory, Nexus, AWS Package Manager, Cloudsmith. You look at build servers like Jenkins and Circle CI, GitHub Actions, GitHub CI/CD, TeamCity, etc. You look at dev platforms, so like Octopus Deploy or Circle CI. You look at configuration management, Ansible, Chef, Puppet configuration stores, IAC platforms, and then you also go after the secrets managers. So things like Vault, Azure Key Store, AWS Secrets Manager, etc. The thing that all of these have in common is that when I'm a red team and I land on your network after I figure out initial access, looking at these things, all it does is require me to go to a website. It's not like some service I have to log into. Most of these have a web GUI in front of them. And so to the SOC, that just looks like web traffic. Now, does all of your SOCs inspect every piece of web traffic that goes across the network? Usually not. They just don't have time. There's too many pieces of traffic going across the network. And so I will go to all of these things as a checklist if the organization has them, and I will attempt to see if they have misconfigured authorization to log into them. I will see if there's portions of the applications which don't require any auth. I will attempt to see if they're not updated because they're websites and they might have security vulnerabilities themselves. And then eventually I will break into one of these places and I will grab more creds for me to pivot into other places inside of your network. So a newer one that I have been loving is actually, if you guys are a big company, if you work for a big company, they're probably catching the AI bug right now, right? And so they are probably somewhere in your organization, your data scientists, your AI people, if you've hired AI power, are training your own model to do something. Now, when you post-train an LLM model, you need a piece of software to harness the data and to do the post-training on a computer somewhere. Now, all of these web apps that do post-training for models are horrendously insecure right now. They're all open source. Some of them don't require authentication at all. So you can just walk into them, look at what models the company's training, and then steal the data they're training on, which is everything. It's their logs, it's their documentation, it's their source code, whatever they're training the model to do. So this is actually a really great one for me in my red teaming practice, is I will look for some of these open source projects that they might have deployed internally to start building their own LLMs. And then, some of these have like horrendously old web bugs because they're very new open source software. So like SQL injection, file inclusion bugs, server-side template injection, all kinds of web bugs. And eventually the goal is to break into the training application and steal the data it's training on, which is everything that the organization usually deems private. Okay, so let's talk about exposure management. So when I did the red teaming stuff for the last couple years, I started off being like, okay, well, I've got sock puppet accounts into all these Telegrams and Discords and stuff like that. And it was cool for a little while. And I started out with level 1. I started out downloading all these torrents of breaches. The problem is when you download breach data, first of all, it's a lot of data, so you have to have a giant hard drive. And then if you want to index it in a database, that's a whole project of engineering time. And also takes a lot of bandwidth, and I have to keep up with the breaches. And I was like, okay, so I get a lot of emails, I get a lot of passwords, etc. But if you want to roll your own kind of exposure management system, the repo I recommend to start with is called Deep Dark CTI. So Deep Dark CTI keeps track of breaches that happen to websites or ransomware data that gets published. They also keep track of the most prominent underground forums that exist on the dark web and give you the onions links for them. They also keep track of some of the Telegram channels that you can basically try to get access to. And so if you want to roll your own system, you can start at Deep Dark CTI and really get pretty far. Now the problem is that that's a lot of work for a red teamer, and I had a small team, right? We only had 3 people at the time of building this out into our methodology. It was really hard because it was a lot of engineering work. Also, what happens in these breach dumps when you get them, they're all formatted differently, right? So if someone breaks into a site and they dump the database, that database schema is different from another company's breach. And so you have to normalize and clean the data, which is hard. So eventually, we did this for about a year. Here is a list of the Telegram channels, like I said, on Deep Dark CTI. But eventually I outsourced this. I'm not here to sell anything, but if you want to know which platform I went with to handle exposure management and get the credentials to win in my red teaming engagements, you can come ask me after the talk, but I don't want to sell anybody on anything. Okay, so for architecture, it's pretty simple. A lot of people had to realize that their networks were flatter than they thought they were. And so they had to implement actual network segmentation and jump hosts for critical IT infrastructure or security products. This was a big one. Some of the attackers in the last 4 years, their secondary or third pivots are actually attacking security software like Splunk or other things, they would target those because they have all the logs and they see all the passwords and stuff like that. And then also, you know, you'd have remote access, we'd have a whole bunch of internal infrastructure APIs to do certain things, like VMware or something like that. And so a lot of times on flat networks, the access to these APIs that controlled your whole infrastructure would be out there, and they would find a cred and then just take control of your infrastructure through VMware or something similar. So you had to basically remove access to some of these more dangerous APIs that like VMware offered. So for the external infrastructure, this is harder. I don't have an answer really for this, right? So one of the answers is that most of these firewalls or SSL VPNs or pieces of infrastructure that attackers have pivoted to attacking because they're very frail, most of them are through web attacks, actually, web bugs. And so the first thing I think of is like, okay, well, to buy us some time, we can wrap our CDN WAFs around these things, right? So, you know, if you subscribe to an Akamai or a Cloudflare or another company that has an inline WAF that stops web attacks, make sure that these web apps specifically are covered by that, because it'll stop a small subsection of attacks. But other than patching really quickly, I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question. Like, you know, these are 0 days that are coming out. You know, your teams end up just like having to respond to these things. Now, one thing I really liked when I was at one of the companies I worked with was that we had like a Slack or Teams channel, and a lot of people had access to it. Developers, security champions, security, you know, all the security teams had access to this channel. And when they thought there was something serious that wasn't being paid attention to, like an exploit that came out, like because they're all watching Twitter, they all have their own feeds, whatever, they just dump it in the Slack channel. And then as a group, we would decide, hey, do we action this? Sometimes the answer would be yes, and why the hell isn't anyone talking about this? And so the team would be like, yeah, we absolutely need to dedicate resources to patch this software across our whole org. Sometimes we would be faster than some of the patching cycles of the vendor itself, because it would take them weeks to put out like a rolled patch or something like that, and we could do like a virtual patch very quickly. So other tips if you're involved in, you know, a type of breach like that, or you know, it's basically know your local FBI field office number so you can work with them. Share your threat intel with other people who are facing the same attacker or adversary, right? This was prevalent in a couple of my jobs, basically people sharing information, TTPs, IOCs, stuff like that. Then once you've faced the scenario, or preferably before you face the scenario, tabletop it. Make sure everybody knows what to do in the event of a breach, because you will get breached. Eventually your organization will be hit by one of these adversaries. And it's no fun if you've never played out whose roles and responsibilities are what. You know, like, it's very stressful. So. And then one of the things about the credentials that I talked about, I have advised many companies to add leaked credentials to their bug bounty, even through like third party, like SaaS that they use, to add credential finding to their bug bounty and pay it at a reduced rate. So if a bug bounty hunter who is presumably like good intention, if they find on the dark web, they do their own research, they find a cred of one of your employees out in the dark web and they submit it to your bug bounty and it's valid and it works, pay them, right? Not like a normal web bug or exploitation bug level, but pay them at a reduced level. That's it. If you're interested in talking about stuff more, or want to follow other content that we do, or interested in the red teaming or training we do, that's my site, and I can take questions for the next 10 minutes. Yes, sir.
How many Gucci bags did you buy?
How many Gucci bags did I buy? So I went for fake Rolexes. I have a fascination. There's also like a ecosystem of how good the fake is for the Rolexes too, which is really interesting to do research in. So yeah, that was my thing. Yes, sir.
Have you ever actually called the FBI number, and what kind of experience was that? Did they take you seriously, or do you have to be a big player, the little mom and pop shop, call them up?
So the question is, if you call the FBI numbers for your local field office for a cyber incident, Do they take you seriously if you're a small company? I would say most of the time the answer is maybe, but a lot of times we would go with seats or with basically IOC data and stuff that they could use, and then they would take us more seriously. It's like, cool, you're trying to help the cause, you're contributing some data to this investigation that we already know about, because they're probably working on 3 other breaches that are happening just like yours by the same threat actor. And then once you're willing to share, then they're willing to share more, which was, I think, mostly our experience.
So you gotta have something to give them.
Sometimes, yeah. Yes, JR.
What do you find in the field to combat the Emperor's New Clothing around 2FA versus the attacker just buying cookies that bypass 2FA and bypass all the security controls?
So the question is, like, you know, I talked a lot about creds being bought on the dark web, and you know, like, how do you combat that? You know, because you already have 2FA and all the good stuff. So the exposure management part is really important. I think it's a, you know, like where we realized that secrets management was really important as part of a security program. Exposure management is actually a place that I've told a lot of people to invest in. So I run with a vendor, I'll just say their name, I'm not trying to sell them or anything, I do work with them a lot, is a Flare. And their whole job is basically to sit on the dark web, to sit in those Telegram channels, those WhatsApp channels, and monitor credentials. And so I put in my domain in there, and they'll tell me anytime a new leak comes out in the dark web. Now there's several vendors that do this, like IntelX and a whole bunch of other ones too. But I think as part of your CTI teams, exposure management should probably be one of their number one responsibilities these days. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You might not know the exact numbers, it's just ballpark percentage, but it's the 80-20 rule, right? You've got 80% of your apps inside your VPN, black ones. You've got vulnerabilities, you've got patching, you don't get the whole of the medium.
Yeah.
How many of the percentage of the breaches are from that last 20, 5%, 1%? Like, you don't get the legacy stuff, you don't get the emergency stuff.
So the question is that you know about, and you're able to patch, and you're able to add security controls to about 80% of what you have as part of your attack surface. And then you don't know 20% of what's out there usually. And that is a very accurate statement. Most organizations only know about 80% of their assets that are out there. So how do you reconcile that? Yeah, breaches do come from that 20%, right? If you cross-correlate things like critical bug bounty submissions to breach type activity from threat actors against web apps, they do tend to target stuff that you forgot about. The lost and lonely toys in that 20%. So yes, it does come through there. Like, how do you reconcile it? I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, right? Like, if you're going to be a CISO and in that seat or a defender, like, you're never going to 100% be safe, right? You have to be ready for a breach. You have to have tabletop, you have to have runbooks, you have to have a security staff that's ready to deal with it. So, you know, there's no way to 100% protect. I think that the other pillar I don't really talk about in this talk is like how I structure and prioritize the security program. Asset management is my number one. Understanding my attack surface so I can get down from 20% that I don't know down to 5%, really important to me, maybe even 2%. It's still out there. Yeah. But at least I might know about it. You know, I might know a lot of it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I haven't seen it. So the question was physical theft of devices, security keys, stuff like that. I haven't seen a lot of that in a lot of the breach research I've done. I mean, like, it could fit down there on the ladder where it's like corporate espionage, insider threat, or just like, you know, following you to a coffee shop, hoping to grab your laptop or something like that. But that is some hardcore, usually probably government-backed like stuff. If they really want to get access to your stuff and they go on that level, like that leaves a lot of. There's a million cameras in the world, right? So like, someone can get attributed very quickly if they're going to that level to steal access to your network. So. Yes, sir.
How do you as an individual find out what is out there for you rather than just an organization?
So I mean, the great services are Have I Been Pwned? Hash is another one that's a paid red teamer tool. I mean, Troy Hunt's Have I Been Pwned is amazing. So as an individual, go there, put in your email address, see what breaches you've been a part of, go to that site, audit what password might be in there, reset it, change it. That's the like consumer way to do that. Now for the other stuff, there's not really a service that goes deep into the dark web. Like Troy stuff is breach data that's probably level 1 or level 2. It's not level 3 or level 4. I don't really have a great answer for you there. I have some platforms that I can look at as a security person that tell me if my stuff's in there, but I don't know as a consumer. I don't have a good answer for you. So. Cool, thank you very much. Thank you very much.